The International Criminal Court, the ICC, as a concrete idea, celebrates its 20th birthday this year, but it's accused of having a bias against Africans. Are the allegations fair, or is the ICC merely acting in response to requests from African governments? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. The International Criminal Court is a last resort for the prosecution of serious international crimes, including genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. When you see who the majority of charges have been leveled against, you can understand why some say there is an African bias.
The International Criminal Court has brought people guilty of war crimes to justice, jailing warlords and rights abusers. But the majority of these charges have been against Africans, causing some African leaders to accuse the ICC of being biased against the continent. The United Nations voted for the ICC to come into force in 2002. Based in the Netherlands, the ICC has global jurisdiction and tries 4 types of crime: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. The ICC delivered its first verdict in 2012, finding DRC warlord Thomas Lubanga guilty of war crimes. He was jailed for 14 years. The court has convicted 4 people in total, all of them Africans, although one former DRC Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba had his conviction overturned. The majority of its indictments have also been of Africans, leading to accusations of bias and even threats to leave the ICC by some African countries. South Africa announced it was leaving the ICC in October 2016. That happened after they refused to obey an order to arrest Sudan's Omar al-Bashir during a visit to the country. Soon after, Gambia and Burundi alleged there was bias against Africans and also said they were withdrawing. Other leading Africans, like Rwanda's Paul Kagame, have accused the ICC of being biased, and Kenya's President Kenyatta is also a prominent critic.
Our experience at the ICC demonstrated a glaring lack of impartiality in this institution. We have started to see many more nations openly recognizing that the ICC is not impartial.
The ICC does not accept the accusations and argues that many cases they investigate were brought by African countries themselves.
It is African leaders that are engaging the ICC. It is not ICC that is going over African leaders.
Despite threatening to leave the ICC, neither South Africa nor Gambia withdrew in the end. But these recent moves show some African countries are willing to use allegations of bias as a pretext to leave. Is the ICC disproportionately targeting Africa? Or is it merely acting in response to requests from African countries to investigate possible crimes?
And I'm glad to say that joining us on Skype from New York, we have Elise Kepler from the International Justice Programme of Human Rights Watch. We go to Salzburg in Austria, and Angela Mudukuti joins us from there, an international criminal justice lawyer. And with me at the round table, we have Awal Allo, a lecturer in law at Kiel University, and Ahmed Tugod Lisan, Sudanese lawyer and politician, part of the Darfur peace process. Thank you all for joining me. Before we get into whether there is an African bias, I want to talk to Elise, if I may, and say, in what sense does the International Criminal Court work as a whole?
The International Criminal Court is set up to be a court of last resort for victims of atrocities. The court only steps in when national courts are unable or unwilling to prosecute the most serious crimes: genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The creation of the ICC was historic and unprecedented, to have a permanent court that could be available to victims when impunity prevails.
I suppose, excuse me if the question was a little bit obscure, because what I meant was not how does it work in terms of the technicalities, but how does it work in terms of the job it is supposed to do? Does it work?
It has an incredibly difficult job. Let's start with the fact that the International Criminal Court does not have a police force. It is reliant on the cooperation of states, and its authority primarily extends to states that have joined. So this is, it's a complicated situation, and it's a complicated mandate. And the court has been operating now for just over 15 years. And it has had some successes for sure, but it's also had challenges and gaps in performance that will need to be improved over time.
Angela, I mean, we're talking about, or Elise is mentioning successes. I mean, there is only just a handful of people still behind bars. Some of those haven't even been successfully prosecuted yet. They are still on remand. This court has cost billions and billions of dollars. In what sense is it a success?
I would say it's a success in the sense that it has produced a form of deterrence. There are many people who are deterred by the fact that if they commit genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity, they may find themselves before the International Criminal Court. And that in itself is quite valuable. Also working with victims, I've worked with victims a lot, and knowing that there is a process and a system of justice that exists, whether it functions at its optimal capacity is a different question. But the fact that there are means and there's a mechanism by which they will receive justice is also an important fact. And I think that's something we need to consider when we look at whether the ICC has actually made an impact. And in that sense, I would say yes.
It's a bit like stating categorically that the death penalty is a deterrent. How can you possibly know that this is putting off monsters of humanity from committing atrocities?
I would reverse the question and say, what if there wasn't an International Criminal Court?
Well, there wasn't one once, and we're not
interest?
seeing a lessening of any of the terrible massacres by any stretch of the imagination, are we, in parts of Africa and the rest of the world?
I would say, I mean, this is a statistical question, and I don't think there's enough empirical evidence to substantiate whether we can answer that question in a yes or no fashion. What I can speak to is working with victims on the ground who have been victims of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and the impact there as well. So, I mean, we can get into the semantics and statistics, but I think this is an empirical question that nobody can really answer definitively.
So it is a comfort. Is it worth all the money that's been spent just to apply an emollient, if you like, on the wounds of those who've been hurt?
I think looking at this institution from a financial point of view doesn't really give us the entire picture, right? And I agree with the two guests that this is a significantly important international institution, does provide some hope for victims of atrocities around the world as an institution of the last resort. But in practice, the possibility of those who are on the receiving ends of these atrocities accessing international justice that is far placed from where they are is very, very limited. And the fact that we see on the ground in terms of the cases the court has looked at so far essentially confirms precisely this concern. So the problem is not so much that we don't need this institution. Of course we need this institution. There's certainly no question about that. There is a broader consensus. And you can see that consensus by the fact that within 3 years' time, 60 states ratified the Rome Statute and the Rome Statute.
Well, we'll get on to who hasn't ratified it in a little while. Yeah.
Exactly. But that shows that there was an appetite for our international institutions of justice. But in terms of how the court operated, its excessive focus on Africa and the fact that other states who have been complicit or who have committed the same atrocities are free and have not been held to account by this court show that there is something that is fundamentally problematic.
Do you mind if we leave that for just another couple of minutes? The court of public shame, if you like, being held up and pilloried and being pointed out as a possible war criminal. Is that enough? Because I look at your country in particular, Omar al-Bashir, indicted by the International Criminal Court. Where is he now?
Well, if we look to
he's not in The Hague on trial, is he?
That's correct. The court has not don't have a mechanism to execute the arrest warrants. The state members who are supposed to cooperate with the court has not yet shown any willingness to cooperate effectively. So this gave the opportunity to the President al-Bashir to move freely to a number of states members of the ICC. But this is not the reason why people rejecting or saying that the ICC failed to deliver its promises.
Because you still believe it works, and it's a good thing, and this is why I'm quite
Definitely,
surprised.
if we take the Sudan case, for example, the impact of the ICC in Sudan is immense and huge. Huge in a sense that they improved our national law. Because of the involvement of the ICC, we managed to have a criminal code that contains the international crimes. We improve our procedural law to the standard that required by the international, international law and to the standard of the ICC. The ICC became an issue, the political issue came in the political agenda of the Sudanese communities, the political parties, the civil society, individuals, different communities. There is a huge awareness about the role of the justice and the importance of bringing about justice and stability in the country through judicial means. So we believe that
So it holds a mirror up to society and asks society to judge itself, perhaps by establishing better practices within the country.
Well, definitely, if because there is a lack of will from the political authorities in the country. Okay. But as long as there is a government that's capable to deliver justice, we believe that there is mechanisms on the ground in terms of law, substantial law, procedural law, and public support to deliver justice.
I suppose it's quite it's strange that you should say that when, in fact, the man who's in charge of the political system in that country is somebody who's been indicted and is refusing to go and face this particular court. But that, I do want to bring in Elise. It's simply a matter of sort of we have to go round a couple of times and then to give everybody a fair chance. Let's talk about this suggestion that African countries, as Desalegn, the former PM of Ethiopia, said, it is a racist institution hunting Africans. Why that impression?
This has become a major issue of debate with the African Union and some African leaders, this charge that the ICC is somehow targeting Africa. It is factually incorrect. In fact, it is true that most of the situations currently before the International Criminal Court are from Africa, but the majority of those either came about because an African state asked for the ICC to help in delivering justice for serious crimes because its national systems were unable or unwilling. That's true for Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda.
In fact, I think
Mali.
the only one where it didn't happen was in Africa was Kenya. Am I right?
Well, it's now Kenya and Burundi.
And
then
Burundi's
there are two
withdrawn, yeah?
Yeah, but that does not actually affect the investigation that's going on. But so essentially you have a majority that asked the ICC to become involved, and then the African Union is somehow suggesting that that didn't happen or doesn't have meaning. The reality is that the ICC is limited in the situations it can pursue. It's limited by some states that have not become members, and it's limited by the politics of the Security Council in bringing justice for places that have not become members. That's a huge problem. And that's something that needs to be addressed. And that's why you see that, for example, Syria is not before the International Criminal Court, even though the demands of justice require it, or that North Korea, Burma is not before the International Criminal Court. But that doesn't mean that the court itself is targeting Africa, more that there are other limitations on where the court can reach.
Okay, so referring to Elise's point there, Angela, I mean, the US, permanent members of the UN Security Council, US, Russia, China, not part of the International Criminal Court. So in what sense can it work? And then we'll get on to the African question again, but I want to go through what Elise has referred to there. How can it work as an international body if that's the case?
Oh, I think we've seen it functioning already since 2002. So it functions, but again, the question of whether it's at optimal capacity or not, different question. And I think this is definitely a fault in the system that we don't have universal buy-in into the International Criminal Court in their own statute. And that the three powerful countries you've mentioned powerful in every sense are not a part of the system. And therein lies the criticism that comes from African states, that three powerful members of the Security Council who have the power to refer
This
are not
is the
part of the
bizarre
system.
thing, isn't it? They can say, we would like you to investigate this person in this country, but by the way, we're not part of the court, and therefore we will not respect any prosecutions that are brought about of our citizens.
Absolutely, and it's a constant problem, and this is something the International Criminal Court, the Security Council, and the NGOs who work closely on these issues need to consider reevaluating, because it will continuously jeopardize the International Criminal Justice Project.
Okay, Awal, so you've been dying to say something,
no,
and
absolutely. And I think one of the
polite by going around everyone.
Look, I'm not one of those people who make the claim that the ICC have this simple bias of racism towards Africans. That is not what is going on here. But the fact that there are so many cases from Africa, in most cases, are explained in terms of these self-referrals. What people misunderstand here is that countries like Uganda, Central African Republic, and Democratic Republic of the Congo referred themselves to the ICC because that suited them.
Because by the time they came around to referring this particular person, he was no longer in power at that point.
No. The reason they referred the situation to the ICC is because they can use the ICC to mobilize international support for the war that is going on in the country against their adversaries.
Yes.
So when they invite the ICC, they are not inviting the ICC to investigate the government as
cloak
such.
of respectability for their struggle.
Exactly. So there is a political motive that underlines why African states invited the ICC. And also, by the way, an important point, the Rome Statute, although it can be interpreted as such, it wasn't really intended to allow states to refer situations within their own territory. There's nothing in the language of Article 14 that suggests that is the case. It was intended for a situation where State X would refer to the ICC a situation in State Y. But if one state is to invite the ICC to investigate itself, of course there is something there. There is something problematic. And the other point I would like to point out is when we talk about these questions of accountability and justice, and I think there are serious problems in Africa, maybe disproportionately than any other part of the world. But these ideas of justice and accountability have historical origin. They originated here in Europe. And there is a way in which, when the ICC was set up, the system is skewed towards the Europeans, Euro-Americans. So when, for example, the principle of complementarity, which one of the guests referred to, was envisioned, that's a principle where the ICC can only...
Too Eurocentric.
It's too Eurocentric. I just want to make this point. The idea is that the ICC can intervene only in situations where national jurisdictions fail. Now, that has a political purpose, I think. And the Germans and the Americans have bragged very publicly about this. The purpose is that while the ICC would have a hard time to establish that European and American justice system failed to prosecute their citizens, right, their servicemen, but it's very easy to make this case when it comes to African nations. Right?
When it comes to major conflicts in Europe in the last 50, 60 years, we do have special tribunals for countries where there have been terrible atrocities. It's not necessarily the ICC. So can we stick with the ICC if we may at this particular moment? And the suggestion is that African countries, far from being victims of the ICC's perceived bias, are actually playing the system to their advantage.
Well, basically, I don't agree with the argument that the African countries refer their situations to the ICC simply because they want to gain a political objective. Let us look to the situations. Take the situation of Uganda, for example. The referral intended...
Was this Joseph Kony?
Yes, yeah. The referral intended to bring peace through justice. And if we look to the outcome of the negotiations of Juba that led for the parties to reach agreement and ask the Security Council to use Article 16 to stop the investigation. This is clear indication that the will of the government is not to use it as a tool, rather than as a tool to gain political objective, rather than to use it as a means to achieve peace. So the argument or the debates of justice and peace through the courts It's an old argument, but at the end, let us look at the reality on the ground. If we take the example of Sudan, currently the situation in Sudan, basically there is no peace, although the ICC intervened. But as I said, the impact of the ICC huge, although the President of the Republic is still free. We believe that the intervention of the ICC in the Sudan situation is a reasonable situation because the nature of the crimes committed in Darfur amount to the threshold of the Rome Statute.
Well,
and we don't have an African mechanism to hold the health of the state accountable or the other perpetrators accountable. So the only option for the people or the victims is to rely on the ICC to address their grievances.
And would that be the case, Angela? I mean, you obviously weren't around at the time of the War of Independence in Zimbabwe. That is your country. But it seems to be slightly arbitrary that in one country things are investigated by the ICC and in other countries there aren't. And there's been allegations in a program we've just done about Zimbabwe of massacres by Robert Mugabe and Emerson Mnangagwa, who's now the new president of the country. Is it arbitrary where these prosecutions or persecutions, if you want to call them that, fall?
Well, I think we need to focus on the limits of the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction in Zimbabwe. It is not a signatory. There's been no United Nations Security Council referral, and there's definitely been no SOF referral. So really understanding the
But there have been massacres or allegations of massacres there, and that's what the court's all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. There have been allegations of massacres in many countries in the world, but the lack of jurisdiction prevents the International Criminal Court from intervening. And as it is a treaty-based system, the ICC cannot proceed without buy-in from various states, and the states, Zimbabwe in particular, and the other countries we've mentioned, have not signed the Rome Statute.
I know you want to say something. I want to go to Elise first, and that is the failure of the court, Elise, isn't it? Is that its hands are tied?
That is the failure of the international system. I think you may be putting too much expectation and requirement on the International Criminal Court. This is an institution that's operating in a larger landscape. It's not possible for it to be all things beyond the limits of that landscape. The challenge and the objective is to build the capacity of the ICC, increase its reach, and insist that powerful governments and Security Council members not block justice for the worst atrocities. But the ICC does not exist in a vacuum and cannot be expected to somehow on its own surmount the restrictions and limits of the international landscape.
Okay, Ahmed, then, and I know you want to get in, but I'm going to let you round the program off in just a minute. If you could change something that it was possible to change about the International Criminal Court, what would it be?
Well, I think it is good if the international community encourage the member states to cooperate effectively with the court, and also to push more states to join the Rome Statute, and also to let the the Security Council to support the ICC, support in a sense that, you know, when they refer cases, they refer cases with some disputes. Let us take examples. They referred the situation in Darfur to the ICC after long investigation, and they came to the conclusion that the nature of the crimes committed in Darfur amount to genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. But if we look to the situation in Libya, the referral that happened, they referred to the situation without proper investigation. So the Security Council, they need to adopt some kind of criteria.
So there are anomalies.
Yes,
I'm going to have to go to I want to bring him in because we're getting towards the end of the program.
I think this is a very important institution that we need to defend it, that we need to protect it. But at the same time, it is important that we point out some of the politics of power underlying the structure of the ICC. So when the situation in Darfur was referred to the ICC by Security Council, we know the politics behind that and how a decision was taken in the United States that what happened in Darfur was genocide. I'm not contesting that. And I agree that Sudan needed to be referred. But at the same time, there are other situations that were not referred.
Well, this is a camel. It's been designed by committee and it doesn't look like it would work.
Exactly. So the problem here is the selective use of the court by the big powers to advance their own political agenda. But at the same time, the political use of some African states to refer certain situations to the ICC. So there are broader political questions underlying
They're doing the scales of justice. The scales of justice are not
exactly.
necessarily weighted in favour
Exactly,
of justice,
exactly.
and people are
Justice-
using them for their own political ends.
Exactly.
How
It
do you
is-
end that, Elise?
I think it's essential to remember that there are victims of atrocities around the world who are looking for justice and who need justice. The International Criminal Court is not a perfect institution, and it operates in a very flawed international landscape. But I think what Angela said at the outset is crucial. What would the world look like without an ICC? And we see around the world when atrocities are being committed, victims calling out to say, let's look at the ICC. What can be done? This is a beacon of hope. It needs to be improved. It needs to be strengthened. But it is essential that it be out there as a possibility. And even that inspires better chance for justice.
And that is a matter of opinion, for which we thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your opinions. One of the suggestions being that it sends a signal to the International Criminal Court that bad people anywhere can't get away with what they think they can. It's the International Criminal Court itself that has been in the dock on this round table. Your decision, guilty or not guilty. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.